Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on managing high-risk individuals, an introduction webinar. As advertised, we'll undertake an entry-level exploration into the topic of people of concern and managing high-risk individuals. This is our fourth webinar as part of the ecumenical partnership between the National Council of Churches and Catholic Professional Standards. Welcome, Laura, the National Coordinator of the Safe Church Program for the NCCA. Good morning.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
And today with us, we have Carl Collins, who's the Director of Child Protection Solutions. Carl is a former Senior Child Protection Investigator, Team Leader and Departmental Courts Prosecutor with Department of Human Services. He was also the Co-Founding Director of CASET Global, providing training and consultancy to schools, colleges, churches, welfare agencies, and non-government organisations, as well as police forces throughout Australia, the Asia Pacific, and the UAE. Welcome, Carl. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
And just before we get into the session, a little bit of housekeeping. If you aren't familiar with the webinar platform, you will see a few things pop up throughout the session. They might be some documents that we're going to make available to you as resources, or some polling questions, which is an opportunity for us to get a sense of who's in the room, and how you're tracking, and also how the content is hitting you all, and how you're feeling about it, and any comments that you might have. There is the chat function, and I do encourage you all to use that to ask questions, make comments as we go. You do have the ability to send a private message to us as well if you don't want it to be public. But that is on the tabs on the side of your view there. And I do encourage you to use that to ask questions of Carl as we go throughout the session. We do have a Q&A period set aside at the end. So please put in your questions, and we'll aim to get it to as many as we can. Some of the content and language that we're going to talk to today may be uncomfortable, and this topic is confronting. But it is especially important that we have this discussion given post-Royal Commission and what we know about child sexual abuse, especially in our faith communities. So we'll get started. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and waters of the country I'm now on, the Butchulla people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and young leaders of today and the future. I also acknowledge and pay respect to any Aboriginal people who may be present with us today. I wish to acknowledge traditional custodian and elders past and present of the land and waters of the country wherever you may be linking in from. And CPSL and the NCCA are committed to the ongoing work of reconciliation with our Aboriginal families and communities. We also acknowledge the lifelong trauma of abuse victims, survivors, their families, and the failure of churches in Australia to protect, believe, and respond justly to children and vulnerable adults, and the consequent breaches of community trust.
We've got a prayer for you on the slide today, and I will actually read it out. Usually we just leave it there, but I'll read it out. Gracious God, provide us with a listening heart so that we see and hear the voices of children and vulnerable people. May our faith organisations, authorities and families respect, listen and do what is required to help all children and vulnerable people feel safe. Help us to recognise the hurt felt by the wounded, initially by abuse, and then again through the failure to be heard. We ask you to provide each of us with the wisdom to exercise our duties as safeguarding practitioners with compassion, integrity and clarity as we strive to protect the most vulnerable in our community. Amen.
Do
you want me to go, Daniel?
Yep.
Okay, so CPSL and NCCA have joined forces to develop resources designed to help faith communities across Australia keep children safe and protected in their organisations. This Introduction to Managing High-Risk Individuals online webinar is intended for anyone involved in a faith or church community and would like to understand or learn about how to identify and manage high-risk individuals in your context. This means parishioner, lay, ordained, ministry, employed or volunteer. Participants will gain an entry-level understanding of how to identify, manage and respond to at-risk individuals, high-risk individuals. This session focuses on responding to those individuals with a substantiated complaint or convicted of an offence relating to child sexual abuse. Some topics listed here will be just referred to, whilst others will be addressed in greater detail by Carl. This Introduction to Managing High-Risk Individuals webinar explores the different types of child sex offenders, how they think, operate, target, groom and infiltrate, organisational versus victim grooming, a question around can offenders be rehabilitated, and rates of recidivism. The webinar will also help you understand the difficult types of offender profiles, understand the importance of psychological testing, understand your own church and faith context, and develop an ability to manage high-risk individuals, as well as identify gaps and areas for improvement, and understand the best practice around responding.
Thanks, Laura. I've just got there for those Catholic entities out there that this topic speaks to a specific requirement in the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards, and that's 8.32, which requires that where an entity becomes aware that someone has a conviction or a substantiated complaint of child sexual abuse, that they undertake this process. So this is especially relevant. In relation to today's topic and some of the video clips that we'll be viewing and showing you all, as we take a deeper dive into abuse, I just want to ask you all to be mindful that you may find some of these topics and the conversations difficult, unsettling. It's definitely challenging and confronting to us all. So just would like to, encourage you to be mindful of any triggers or stories that you may bring up for you, any memories, and to be mindful of how you are feeling through this process. As we talk about these topics, particularly child sexual abuse, I'm reminded of a quote from former Commissioner Robert Fitzgerald, who says that child sexual abuse thrives in an environment where there is secrecy. The perpetrator requires it, and the vulnerabilities of children are enhanced by the secrecy of it. And when asked, how do you break this down? By having normal conversations about sex and sexual abuse. And this is what we're here to do today, but just be mindful of the content and how it is making you feel.
Yeah, so just to add to that, we really encourage you to be aware and recognise your own story, and we do recognise that amongst, even in our safeguarding professionals, we do have survivors working in this space, or you might have family, friends, colleagues. Everyone has a connection to this, and we just ask you to be mindful of your own connection and your own story to it. Carl, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think it's important to note, and I actually share this no matter where I present or speak, whether it's in or outside of Australia, and I think it's really, really important to do so, and that is that one thing with my background that I also should mention is that having spent 17 years as a team leader, investigator and children's court prosecutor with Protective Services, DHS, I also, at the conclusion of that, spent 10 years in full-time pastoral ministry at the Marian Church of Christ in Adelaide. So in a sense, I've dealt with this on both sides of the ledger, so to speak. But as I was in that role for many years, I've seen things that are firmly burnt into my mind in terms of child abuse and sexual exploitation. And as I've travelled and continued to speak, and also in my time in ministry, I continued to hear the stories. That highlights the magnitude of the problem. And what I want to stress today, that whatever I share is not, we don't need to beat this up. We don't need to exaggerate. It's how it is, it's reality. And it's important that we acknowledge that. So having seen things and continuing to hear the stories, and this is applicable whether I've been in a room of 10 people conducting some very advanced training or an auditorium of 300 people presenting a keynote address. In that space, I have never ever not, this is vital stuff, I've never ever not had people come to me after a seminar, either immediately after or contacted me after, in order to share something of their abusive backgrounds. And that particularly relates to sexual abuse. I've never ever not had someone come and talk to me about that. So that's important to knowledge. But you know what? Also, today's about awareness, a healthy level of awareness, and it's also important that we acknowledge the upside, because there's an upside, and that is that I also hear the incredible stories, stories of people who come and say, I've got there. Yes, I've got some hurt, I've got some scars, but I got there because of my friends, my family, my faith, my God, whatever it might be, I got there. And I would just, if there is ever anybody in any of my audiences who may be thinking, well, I'm really pleased for them and I'm thankful for that, but that's not my experience, I would want to encourage anybody in that area to never, ever give up running the race, fighting the fight, because the good news is, no matter how impossible it may feel, recognizing that it is possible. And as I said, it would be remiss if we didn't share that, just to encourage people and affirm people in that place.
Thank you for that, Carl. And just to add to that around support, as Carl said, he's had people come to him. If you are not aware of who your pastoral care person is within your denomination, if you're in a smaller denomination and you're not sure who you might go to after this webinar, should it trigger you, please come to us and we will help you and we'll find someone for you. But if you do know who your designated pastoral care person is, please go and approach them for a conversation, or Carl, or come to us and we can help you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carl and Laura. Before I hand over to you, Carl, I just wanted to let everyone know that I have made available the Child Protection Solutions resource book, which a lot of the content that Carl's going to go through with us today in a lot more detail is in that resource book. And so we are very fortunate that Carl's made that available to you all. So I do encourage you to access that, and it does provide more detail. But Carl, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, I suppose the first point to kick off with that is important to acknowledge and look into is the different types of child sex offenders. You know, the term pedophile is a very loosely used term. Whenever there's a newspaper report, a television report, often it refers to pedophiles, and not all child sex offenders are pedophiles. And look, we don't today obviously have time to go into all the different types of offenders, but just to give you an idea, an example, some people may be aware of this, some certainly may not. And that is, we have ephebophiles and hebophiles and neprophiles, etc. And to give you an idea, an ephebophile is a person who has a sexual preference for adolescent males, and a hebophile has a sexual preference for adolescent females. Then we go into infotophilia, and when you use the word info or infant, you can obviously guess what that relates to, very young children. Then we have the term pedophile, and the correct pronunciation is pedophile. It's a pediatric term, but we move into the pedophile, and the pedophile is the one who has a true sexual preference for children. The pedophile is the one that will do their homework, they will do their reconnaissance, and they have an ability to put very long-term plans of action into place. So when we look at the fact that not all sex offenders are pedophiles, obviously I use the term child molester, because the reality is that when we look at the different types of child sex offenders, it's not against the law to be a pedophile. It's not against the law to be an ephebophile. It's not against the law to be a hebophile. It's against the law when that person crosses the line and becomes a child molester. And so child molesters can incorporate all of those people. So it's not against the law to think what you want to think or be what you want to be. Don't mistake me. I'm not saying it's right, because it's not. but it's when you cross that line and commit an offence. So that when we look at those different types of offenders, they can have very particular likes and dislikes, particularly when we talk about the pedophile. Some pedophiles, for instance, may only ever be interested in a child in a certain age bracket. It might be a boy, and this boy will be between the age of 8 to 10 years of age. Any child over 10 years of age is never, ever going to be at risk from this offender because they are not interested. Any child younger than the preferred age group, they are on the radar because, and that's often when the grooming process kicks in that we'll talk about shortly, because when that young person becomes the age of that preferential offender, that's when now they are obviously at risk of harm. Some may need to be girls, some need to be boys. Some may have to have blonde hair, blue eyes. If they don't have blonde hair, they're not at risk. So there are very particular likes and dislikes. And of course, to add to the complexity, some offenders are indiscriminate and will offend across the board as well.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to a person of concern process, how important is it to know what type of offender you're actually dealing with?
Yeah, look, incredibly important because there's another one that I'll introduce now, and that's called the situational offender. So when we look at the situational, and this is, I like to break it down for the simplicity and clarification, particularly in a session like this, is that we have a situational offender who does not have a sexual preference for children, but they offend against children for many varied and complex reasons. But the key word is situation. They are impulsive and they respond to a situation that presents itself. So they don't plan, they don't groom, they don't strategize. A situation presents itself, and for some reason that, you know what, they may never even be able to understand, let alone us, they cross the line and they offend. Whereas we've got the situational offender who has the planning, the strategy, the cunningness, the capabilities to put those plans into action. So where that's really important is I often get calls from various churches to say, look, we understand you've been involved in writing policy with this. You've implemented this in a number of denominations, the person of concern policy. Could we have a copy of that? And my first question is, well, why do you want a copy of that policy? And the response is often, well, we have a sexual offender within our congregation and we want to put them on a management plan. And my response is, well, no, I won't give you a copy of that policy because nobody yet has profiled this offender to see what type of offender they are. Because they are very, very different. So that's where the assessment process comes in. And it's important that we know what we are dealing with before we can even look at, and this might not sit well with some people, but we've got to look at that before we can even decide as a part of that process if this person can attend, even under very strict supervision and guidelines, because in some cases, sadly, the advice to the church may be, given a profile, given an assessment, our recommendation may be that offender should not be permitted to step 1 foot inside your door. But hear me clearly here. That doesn't mean the church doesn't go to that offender and we just disregard somebody and we don't care for them and support them in their life. So we need to keep that in context. And the person of concern policy is not about creating obstacles to not allow people to attend church. It's about creating pathways where they can, but the safety children at all times must be absolutely paramount.
Yeah. Okay. So, Carl, you're on this. You're talking about the situational and the preferential child molesters. Yeah. Are situational offenders less likely to reoffend, and if so, present a lesser risk?
Yeah. Okay. A couple of things there. I think my personal view, and some of the things I shared today, and particularly down the track, and in the next session when we look at the actual person of concern policy. Some people will agree with some of it, some people won't agree. The idea is to take what works for you and what you think fits the DNA of your church, your denomination, etc. But in this window, or what I was going to say is, once you commit a sexual offence against a child, there are some ongoing consequences in life that don't go away. That is a reality, because there is a level of doubt around trust, because that trust has been broken. So I need to say that up front. Situational offenders will have less victims over their lifetime to that of a preferential child molester. However, the complexity there, even with a situational offender, is that in some cases, a situational offender may only ever commit one offence. And that's because this person has the understanding that what they have done is wrong. They have an understanding that the damage that they can cause or have caused here already by one act.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed many offenders where they've seriously, they've said to me in interview sessions, you've probably heard all of this before. You're never going to believe me, but until this happened today, this was something that never entered my mind. But an opportunity, a situation presented it, and I crossed the line.
Wow.
That person gives you something to work with. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but the psychologists and therapists I work with would back this up. That actually gives them something to work with. However, the problem for a situational offender is also that it can become a long-term pattern of behaviour because situations continually present, but they're they're normally confined to family. Incestuous fathers are the classic examples around situational offending, because here's another opportunity. My wife is out tonight again or whatever, and there's a situation that I take advantage of.
Yeah.
So that sits in that pocket, whereas the preferential offender, as we know, I've already said, they are strategic, they are cunning, they will put long-term patterns of behaviour. And when I talk about long-term patterns of behaviour, one of many cases that come to mind, but one in particular, we'll call him Bob. Bob's not his real name, but a 65-year-old preferential child molester was in his church without any concerns and without offending for 7 years. He built up his reputation, his relationships, and he was in a church for 7 years before he offended. And over a 12-month period offended against 7 boys. Of which one of those boys sadly took his own life in the end because of the abuse that he had suffered. But for 7 years, the grooming process and the getting to know people and getting liked, getting valued, which all equals getting trusted, it was 101 grooming. And I know we'll talk a bit about grooming. But I hope that just paints the difference between the two types of offenders. So the preferential is obviously, they're both dangerous, but the preferential is the more dangerous, obviously.
And just to touch on that, Carl, like on the grooming process, we've just done our webinar on that grooming process prior to this one. Would you say though, like with this person, Bob, you're talking about, like it was just classic grooming, like the whole community had been groomed, like he was known as a great bloke kind of thing, good reputation and that kind of thing, like he had groomed the community before he offended?
This particular man wrote the manual. Just and 7 years, and the reality here though, that whilst he implemented that 101 style over a 7-year period, what we found when we found that he did and was offending, for the 7-year period that he wasn't offending in that church, he was offending, just not in that church. The church was a part of his process for the next phase of his life. When I sat down and spoke with him, he said, we used to always take the opportunity to interview offenders to find out more about them, learn more about them. Some offenders would cooperate with that because they knew that they were just caught and they had nothing to lose now. Some offenders would tell you where you could go in very clear, colourful terms. But Bob was a classic example where he said, I just did what I've done all of my life. He said, I did my homework. When it was time to move on to the next phase, I worked well ahead and I put my plan into action. And what we found, when that came to light, during that 7-year period, he was a volunteer trainer in an under-16s footy club, not too far from this particular church, and he'd been offending against boys there for around 7 or 8 years. So he was getting ready to move on to his next phase, which is quite a common practice. So, the preferential offender sadly doesn't take holidays or go on long service leave. Whilst they're grooming here, they will be offending back here.
Right.
So the rates of recidivism or reoffending varies depending on the type of sex offender. And is it true, Carl, that pedophiles actually believe that they hold the view themselves that they actually are not harming children by their offending? Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. If we talk about the true pedophile, the preferential, they have a very an unshakable view that they are not doing wrong. They know they're doing wrong in the eyes of the law, but they think that the law is wrong. They think it's ridiculous. They would fight. Many pedophile rights groups such as PI, the Pedophile Information Exchange in the UK. They are on a relentless mission lobbying government to have the age of consent lowered to 4. They don't think it should be. They don't think there should be any age limit, but that in their mind they'll compromise to 4. I mean, go and figure that one out. That's quite interesting. So it's a firm belief. I've had so many offenders just look me in the eye and just pretty well become abusive, just saying, "Who are you to tell me that this is wrong?" There's nothing wrong with this. Rates of recidivism, you know, the difficulty with that is studies vary so much. They just vary so much, and some studies show rates of recidivism around the mid 40% bracket. Some are up in the high 60, some are in the early low 70%. So it varies on across the board in relation to that. My problem is this: my belief, my values, my faith tells me all things are possible. All right, and I never want to lose. I never want to lose that. Here, I won't say but, because if I say but, that undoes what I just said. However, my concern is this, and that is that if you have an offender that truly believes that they are not doing anything wrong, where is the motivation to change that behaviour? That's the problem for me. I mean, I liken it to coming to faith. To come to faith, you need to understand and acknowledge that you're not living a life the way that God wants you to live a life. Therefore, you need to turn from that and head in another direction. Well, that was applicable to my conversion anyway, many years ago. And I applied the same principle. If I don't acknowledge that I'm doing something wrong, who's going to tell me to change, and why should I change? And I think that's really where it goes for me.
And that's part of that transformational, like if you really are, you know, in tune with your faith and spirituality, and you do recognize, like, hey, the way that I'm living is not right, that's part of the transformation. So I imagine there's no transformation without recognition of that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Carl, before we move on, there's been a comment come off the chat, and I just wondered if you might be willing to speak to it about the fact that mentioning that not all pedophiles are male.
Yes, absolutely. Good point. And I would have referred to that. But look, some research came out of the UK about 18 months ago, and it highlighted the fact that female preferential child molesters are more prevalent than what we were thinking or what we thought. However, the reality is, by a long way, it's predominantly male. A long way. But yet there are preferential. Nicolette Ann Lee, I think her name was, an Australian pedophile a number of years ago. She hit the headlines, and she was a classic example. And she received she was found guilty of offending against a number of her students. And she was given this is interesting, she was given a good behaviour bond. There was public backlash from society. There was an appeal that was upheld, and she did a prison term because people were saying there's this myth that female offences against young boys is not as serious as the reverse. It clearly is. You know, there's plenty of evidence to substantiate that. My experience, though, I'm not minimising this, so there are female preferentials. The vast majority of female cases that I was ever involved in mainly related to female situational offenders. And there was an interesting, this is just my experience, there was an interesting thread to the cases I was involved in, and a significant number of those female offenders at a situational level had offended when they'd actually come out of quite domestic violence relationships.
Right.
So I'm not making excuses, but there does seem to be a common thread there with female situational offenders. Yeah. Interesting.
Now, we're going to watch a short clip, Carl, and this speaks to the topic and the conversation that we've just been having around pedophiles, preferential offenders actually believing that they're not doing any harm. So we're going to close our cameras and our microphones, and I'll play this video, and then we'll come back at the end. And Carl, you might want to speak to that.
Yeah, sure.
For decades, powerful men like Haman were allowed to get away with their crimes. But even today, Tom O'Carroll argues he and other pedophiles should be allowed to have sex with children.
You keep saying, by the way, sex with children. It's not sex with children. It's sex, most people think, is sexual intercourse, penis in vagina, and a guy banging away until he gets orgasm. That's not what I mean by sex with children.
What are you talking about?
And I don't think we should talk in this sort of emotive fashion about sex with children.
What is a less emotive term?
Erotic contact with children.
And what would that involve?
Well, it might involve touching or masturbation.
In the warped view of the pedophile information exchange, the only harm caused by an adult having sex with a child occurs later, when the child is supposedly made to feel guilty about it.
If they were traumatised, they wouldn't have gone along.
You see, that's another lie that pedophiles spin. They say that the kids aren't traumatised.
No, wait a moment.
Believe me, they are traumatised, Tom.
Yes, but many years later, as a result of being told... Well, it matters because they would not have been traumatised but for being told that they had been abused.
So this is the point. You'd say that it's not the pedophile that's caused the abuse, it's the responsible authorities like the police and their parents.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you don't accept that having sex with a child can cause any kind of...
Let me tell you, we're getting peculiarly hysterical. Many years later, when people are told that they have been abused and it keeps being rammed into them from the media all the time, then that is the feeling they come to get. They come to think, I must be traumatised because people keep telling me so.
Okay,
That's how it happened.
Can I put to you, there's something in your book. There's a section in your book where you describe the scenario of a little girl sitting on a man's knee.
Yes.
And you describe approvingly how sexual relations with that little girl can be, quote, negotiated by hints and signals, such as complimenting her on her knickers and testing her response. Yeah. And what would be the adequate response from that little girl, Tom?
Enthusiasm.
What would that constitute? How would the little girl show you enthusiasm for you wanting to have sex with her?
Let's move away from...
No. Let's stick to this issue.
Well, all right. Let's stick with the issue, but let me address it in my own way.
The little girl's sitting on your knee, and you've just told her, "I like your knickers."
Let me address it in my own way.
What does that little girl do to indicate that she's willing to consent to have sex with you, Tom?
How does somebody indicate willingness to have consent to anything?
A little girl cannot possibly be a consenting partner in that kind of power relationship. She's sitting on your knee, for God's sake.
Yes, she can.
You're an adult.
Yes, she can.
You use the term enthusiasm. What does that little girl do to indicate that she's enthusiastic?
I think that we're going round and round in circles.
No, what is the answer?
We're going round and round in circles. I've given you my answer multiple times, so I'll finish there.
Which is a non-answer. You just can't answer.
Well, you think it's a non-answer. I think it's an answer. All right.
Well, Carl, so that's Tom O'Carroll, the former chair of the Pedophile Information Exchange in the UK. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that clip?
I think the classic with that clip is I think it says it all. You know, I could talk for another 5 or 10 minutes on that alone, but I just think hearing it from the mouth of a person themselves who has this absolute belief, and I mean, you can see there he pushes his point very hard. He's got this is a very strong belief, and it's a personal conviction, and it's a classic response. I think the disturbing thing about Mr. Carroll, who's quite a well-known British author, by the way. And PI boasts, the Pedophile Information Exchange, boasts many members who are very, very well. They're prominent, and particularly within the judicial system in the UK as well. So they've got very strong backing and pushing for their beliefs. I mean, groups like the Pedophile Information Exchange They're few and far between now, but they do exist. There's still a very large one in America, NAMBLA, the North American Mental Love Association. We had one in here in Australia for many years, but they folded, thankfully. The majority of offenders tend to stay away from these groups, even though some of them boast significant numbers. Tend to stay away because being associated with a group like that, you've got greater chance of being caught because of records and membership fees, etc. But look, that's just a true reflection. That's from an inner belief, and a very strong inner belief.
Yeah. And it was interesting just to see, as you were saying, like there's just no ownership, or there's no, like, every response was kind of stonewalled, you know, until the point where he just got up and walked away. It's like there's no engagement. It's just this belief that, you know, I'm not taking this on. Like,
exactly. And there is no acknowledgement of the trauma.
Yeah, none.
Trauma that is caused, that changes a young person's life forever.
Yeah. And I mean, to describe it as enthusiasm from the child, like the little girl seems enthusiastic about it. Like, that says it all.
It does. I think so. Yep.
Okay, so organisational versus victim grooming and control. Carl?
Yeah, I think that it's just a lot of people tend to just jump to the conclusion that when we talk about the grooming process, that it relates to children. And often children are not the first point of the grooming process. The adult or the organisation is. Because you see, I need to get in here, I need to be liked, I need to be valued, I need to be accepted. But above all, that equals being trusted. And the more people who like me and accept me, if there is a loose suspicion or someone's is onto me, etc., because I build up a good network of supports, these people become my protectors. And this is a very common disclosure by offenders. And it's a part of their grooming process. And you know what? It's not until things become known that, pardon me, not only do we obviously have the child victims here who have also been groomed, but this is where many adults really feel violated themselves, because they realise the penny drops. I've been done here. I have been groomed by this person. And, you know, we still spend too much of our time in churches as consultants, helping churches to pick up the pieces, because they are being held accountable, often through the judicial system, because they're being sued. And that's all secondary. First and foremost, it's about young people, but they're being sued because they failed to respond to this. But even when they had suspicions, which is even more disturbing, because they just didn't want to believe that this was a possibility even. And they're being held accountable. So we're sadly busy in that area of helping churches manage them through the process when they've been infiltrated. And you know what? It's not until we get into many of those situations that we find that church or that organisation has done very little, if anything, to just give their people a healthy level of awareness that may have detected something wrong there, and they've done something about it. So that's it's a very common thing, and it's also, what's disturbing is that people just tend to think, so many people in so many cases when it's broken open will come and say, you know what, I really thought something was not right there. I didn't do anything about it because I just didn't want to. I didn't want to believe it because this is such a good, and they're a good friend. Well, they haven't been a good friend. They've been using you as a part of the grooming process.
Sorry. So obviously, Carl, we've been talking about this. So some offenders are highly skilled in this area, as we've just heard. Can you give some examples of things we might not automatically think of? And I think what you're just saying there is a perfect example. And I think the Royal Commission is part of that as well. You know, a lot of people go to faith communities, and naive's the wrong word, but we go there for acceptance and belonging and community. So I imagine for some people who just don't have this in their realm of thinking, it's just such a shock, you know, and we are now trying to pick up the pieces and cope with it. But is there other things you can add to that we don't automatically think of?
Well, I think one of the things is to encourage people to, when they see something, there's this fear and this is understandable, I don't want to say something about what I'm thinking here, because I don't want to, if this person's not doing what I think they may be doing, or heading in that direction, I don't want to tarnish somebody's reputation, because the reality is that mud sticks. Even, you know, so that's a real problem. But I urge people, if they see the danger signs or signals, and just see, you know, somebody that is just, and here's the fine line, somebody who's just gravitating and always wanting to be with children, or they come into a church and they want to get involved in children's ministries too early. That's a danger flag, because anybody coming into church should have an understanding that I'm going to need to be around here for a long time before I'm going to get to do this and this. Children, there's lots of danger flags there, and particularly if you know what you're looking for. So and so many people just, you know, okay, an example, I had a pastor call me about 3 weeks ago, and this is not an isolated incident. He said, I had somebody come to me in my church who was they'd just been viewing how a man who's in our church is just relating to some of our children. I'm just a little bit worried about it. I don't want to accuse him, but I'm just telling you as the senior pastor, so you can just be aware of that. The pastor rang me. He said, I've been monitoring this man for 3 weeks. He said, I've seen absolutely nothing. But he said, here's my problem. In the last 48 hours, I've had 3 other people come to me. So, and because people came and just raised that concern confidentially, he was able to monitor from a distance, didn't see anything, but now we've got 3 people, which means we've got 4 people expressing concerns about this person. And thankfully, we implemented a process there where it turned out to be right. But thankfully, before the person got an opportunity to do anything within that particular space. But the signals were there early, and some of the danger flags were there early. But look, again, we're talking about really, in many cases, we're not talking about the dirty old man wearing a raincoat in a public toilet. Okay, we're talking about people who are highly skilled here, professionals, hold down very, very good jobs. You know, in terms of abductions, very sadly, yes, we still have children abducted off the street, and they are subject to horrendous crimes. Compared to what we are talking about today, they are in the absolute minority. You know, the reality is, and many people watching may be aware of this, the vast majority of offences committed against children will be committed by someone who the child knows and trusts, and more than likely who the family know and trust, or the organisation, because of the grooming processes. And that is alarming. Some studies show in excess of 90% of victims will know the offender. Personally, I think it's even higher than that. But the alarming fact there is it can't get much higher, can it?
Just, sorry, a question on the chat there, just while you're talking, says, what do we do when we have a suspicion but no evidence?
Well, I think if we're talking within a church setting, an organisational setting, I think it's back to the example I used before, is that you have a discrete. Firstly, you continue to monitor yourself, be vigilant, because this is what awareness training is all about. It's giving people a healthy level of awareness, not overreacting. I mean, even out of sessions like this, we do not want the pendulum swinging to overreactive, ridiculous levels. That's not going to be helpful. It's about a healthy level of awareness. And if you have a discussion with somebody in leadership, pastor, key elder, whatever the case may be, in the structure that you're within, so that they at a healthy level can just monitor the situation. Because what happens, it's 101 child abuse training, understanding and responding to abuse. If we see something, we don't just ignore it, we monitor it. And as we monitor something, as the days, weeks and months roll on, we will either hear, see or be told more things that might add to our concerns, or we see absolutely nothing. And if we have nothing, we have nothing to run with. But it's about just having that healthy level of awareness and some eyes and ears that are keeping a lookout. And it may go somewhere and it may not go somewhere.
And I wonder, Carl, since the Royal Commission and we're all implementing the recommendations, have you seen an improvement in that? Like, hopefully, like I know we engage with our safeguarding experts all the time, but as a professional who's been in this space for a long time, can you say you've seen an obvious improvement in that awareness raising and people switching onto it?
Oh, look, absolutely, and particularly in our churches, and the fact is that, you know, like most mainstream denominations, this is something that I get confronted with a lot because I work in the church, the spiritual sector, and the public sector. And when people find out that you work in the church sector, as we know, there's a lot of people that are ready, willing, and able to jump on the church from a great height and given any opportunity, particularly around this. And the common response is, in a very sarcastic level, "Oh boy, you work in the church sector. I bet you're busy." And I you know what? I proudly fight back now against that, because in my view, and the church, the spiritual sector, in my view now, I think are actually becoming the trendsetters in this. I think we are outdoing other sectors. And I won't name those sectors. I'll keep that for my book one day, but I won't name it here. But I really believe that, and I fight back because I don't want, you know, the offenders have seen the church as a soft target, and that's because the church has been a soft target. You know, we have our values, our faith, forgiveness, a God of second chances, and that's all right. That's fine, and that's it. But offenders will exploit that. And the sad reality is there are many churches out there over many years that have been absolutely gullible in that space. And history proves that's not my opinion. That history shows that is right. And I think that we are moving in fantastic direction these days. And as I said, I think we're doing it as well, if not better, than a whole lot of other sectors in society.
Great. That's great.
Carl, another question that's coming off the chat is it's very much connected to this conversation we're having right now, is how we go about gathering information without mudslinging when there's a suspicion and a concern, but there's no evidence at this point. Yep.
Well, okay, so I'll speak from my example. I'm the independent director of Professional Ethical Standards for Baptist Churches SA and NT, and the person of concern model that we've had there that I wrote along with the other national directors around Australia for Australian Baptist Ministries. We've had this policy in place for quite a while now, and we'll talk about that in more detail in the next session. But as the independent director, well, what I do if it comes to my notice is that we consult with the church straight away, and we just look. The bottom line is you need to take records, you need to document, because you need to document for various reasons. And if you document and you look into a case, it's like any investigation. You know, I've never in my life gone into an investigation trying to prove somebody guilty. I've gone into an investigation to get to the truth. And so sometimes people say, oh, if you're going to open up a file, that's intrusive, and is that legal or not? Well, it's imperative, because we have to be accountable. We open a file, we develop a strategy around it, and you know what, at the end of the day, that file and that strategy may actually be the protection for the person who was wrongly accused or suspected, because it's been looked into, and that can work in both ways. It can either substantiate or unsubstantiate. It's just the ugly nature of what we deal with. You can't not do anything. I've had people say to me, oh, well, I've had friends of mine investigated for child abuse and they did nothing and it destroyed their lives and they've never recovered from it. That's the ugly nature of the situation. You know, I liken it to somebody who's accused of committing a murder. We don't not investigate it for the fear of offending the person. We have to investigate it to get to the truth.
Sure.
So I set it up as a file. I meet with the church. We'll look at putting a strategy in to monitor that person, and that's confidential, and it's monitoring. And hopefully, we get to a point where through that monitoring, we determine the fact that we've actually got nothing to worry about here. There's no substance to this, and also, if something does happen down the track and somebody comes back and says, you did nothing about that and you knew, I told you that I was concerned about this person and you did nothing about it, well, you've actually got a file to go back to demonstrate that you did do something about it and that you'd been vigilant and this was the outcome. It might not be the outcome that person wanted, but the fact of the matter is you have to implement a process whether you like it or not. And again, I'll come back to what I've already said twice. It's just the ugly nature of what we're dealing with. There's just no easy way out of that.
I guess another part of this is What about when there's a person who has either admitted to or perhaps even had a conviction of accessing child pornography only? And so is that change any aspect of this?
Yeah, well, it worries me depending on the way that the person is describing that, because the fact is that most offenders are visually orientated, and the danger in, and statistics would back me up on this, is that those who start out looking, in their words, only at pornography, sooner or later, looking doesn't become enough. And that's where they cross the line, and they will seek to try to arrange contact with young people or groom and implement a process. The other problem I have with that is that, in terms of the word supposed only looking at pornography, at some point, at some time, those children in that pornography that have been filmed and photographed, they have been sexually abused in order to make that material.
Yeah.
Every time somebody opens up that material, they are perpetuating the abuse of that person. That creates the ongoing abuse. Offenders are pretty clever in this way too, and I'll give you one quick example about how offenders use pornography can be as a part of the grooming process as well. One investigation we're involved in involved a young man, 27 years of age, held down a professional job within the medical profession, but within his church, he also set up his own Saturday morning babysitting service for parents in his own church. Groomed the parents beautifully over a number of years, and the parents used to drop their children to his house on a Saturday morning, go out, do some shopping, have lunch, come back early afternoon, pick their kids up. There was some very strong information that this young man was in fact a preferential child molester, and it was raised within the church, but because of the grooming process, parents did not believe it and continued. They ignored the advice and continued to place their children in his care on a Saturday morning. So that became not only a police matter, but a child protection matter, because we had parents who were allegedly failing to protect their children and placing them in at risk. So it was a joint police and CPS operation. So when we went in on a Saturday morning unannounced, there was probably about 8 or 9 quite young children in his care, all playing on the lounge room floor. On his TV set, in full view of these children, was child pornography. And it was homemade and very cleverly done, whereby the cutaways always showed faces of children smiling and laughing and giggling, and the soundtrack behind it was just non-stop laughter and giggling in amongst the sexual abuse of children. So that obviously, what does that say to a young child that's viewing that? All these children are doing this, they're laughing, they're giggling, they're having fun. That lowers their inhibitions, and was a part of his grooming process. So he actually used pornography for that. And offenders use pornography too, because they'll often film either overtly or covertly their activities with kids, and they do that for a number of reasons. One, they can keep it for their own record. They can sell, share, swap it with like-minded people. But the other factor, or the other reason they like to film the pornography, is that with young children in particular, they'll play it back to them. And they'll say, now, if you tell anybody about this, I'm going to show this to mum and dad and you're in trouble. With teenagers, it goes to another level. If you tell anybody about this, I'm going to post this online for the world to see. So they also use pornography, not just for their own gratification, but also meant that as a part of the grooming process as well. That's quite common. Control.
Yeah. Well, Carl, we've got another short clip here that we're going to play. And this is Jack Reynolds, and this speaks to the grooming process specifically. And so we'll just turn our cameras and microphone off and
How did you get them alone?
Grooming. I would check out their family situation. I would check out their clothing to see how well they were, financially. I would check out their social interaction with other kids. When we were on the ballparks, or on the gym floor, you know, I would make sure which ones I wanted to molest. I would give them special attention, congratulate them, talk to them when I know that I would never be allowed to talk to anybody else, you know, aside from everybody. I would give them the attention that an official is not supposed to give anybody, and it made them feel like, wow, he's paying me attention. You know, it is a direct form of grooming.
Were there certain characteristics that you looked for in children before molesting them?
In children, yes, but more I also looked at their families. If I thought the father was a threat, I would not approach the child. If I thought that the child had friends that he would tell, I would not approach him. If I thought the child had friends that were in the same capacity he was, I would approach him, for the simple fact that if I could molest him, I could lure him into believing, grooming him into believing that he would enjoy it, and therefore I could manipulate him into having his other friends come and be molested by me as well.
So perhaps a child that doesn't really have a whole lot of friends, maybe not really a strong family, things like that.
Yes, no spiritual values, weak in education, you know, needs help in many ways, even from split parenting, you know, has a mother who may be having problems with the family, you know, well, here comes superhero in to help out, you know, wow, well, thank you very much. No problem. You ever need me to take them away for the night so you can have a night out? No problem. It works.
So again, Carl, straight out of the horse's mouth there. If you'd like to comment on organisational versus victim grooming and control, I know this has been the theme of our conversation of the last 5-10 minutes anyway. But
yeah. Well, here's a classic example, and he was a teacher and a sports master in a large college in the US, in Arizona, I think it was, and sums it up beautifully in just textbook 101. And the fact is here, the profession that he's in, we need to understand that offenders, one of the most common questions I'm asked is, Carl, do you think that the preferential child molester actually does go into future employment and pathways purely where they will have access to children? And that's an absolute, because offenders will go to the marketplace. They go to where there are children. And we talk about the fact, within organisations, we have organisational risk assessments. Offenders do their own risk assessments and reconnaissance. And Bob, who I spoke to you before about, again, classic example, when we sat down and talked with him and said, why and how was it that you picked this church? He said, well, let me tell you what I did. He said, I did what I've done all my life. He said, I did my homework. I did my reconnaissance. He said, I targeted a number of churches in this area where I'd moved into. He said, I came and visited this church for 3 Sunday mornings. He said, I intentionally arrived at least 45 minutes before church. I walked in the door. I sat in the foyer. I was greeted. I was asked if I'd like a cup of coffee. I was given a cup of coffee. I sat there and I observed. He said, that was my mission. He said, I wasn't at that church to check out whether I liked their the community or the preaching or music or whatever. He said, I was there to assess my opportunities. And he said, I sat back and I watched from the minute I got there. I watched families arriving. I watched what happened when they arrived with their kids. He said, kids were outside the building, running outside, round the corner, down the street. No one was looking out for them. I watched how they went off to their groups and how they came back. He said, I watched over morning tea after church. These were his words. He said, after three Sunday mornings visiting that church, he said, I knew that they were slack. And he said, I knew that this church for me would be, and I quote disturbingly, a smorgasbord, unquote.
Oh, wow.
And that's what it turned out to be. So he did his assessments, he did his risk assessments. And as I also said, the amount of time that he was there before he offended highlights the long-term strategic plan. So that, I mean, he's just a classic example as well. And look, sadly, for people that are listening at the minute, sadly, I'm not just, with an example like that, I'm not just plucking one out of the air to try and think, oh, what is that? My problem is, which ones do I share with you? Because I can give countless examples of that.
Yeah. And again, Carl, as you were saying about, grooming and, communities, you going in and, doing the awareness stuff, like you can see how calculated that is. And for people that have not, had that awareness, it must be just feel like such a, I guess, slap in the face or a violation of like, oh my goodness, we've been here as a faith community gathering and we feel so violated that someone has calculated this so much. Like they must feel so stupid.
Well, absolutely, all of the above. And the other thing is, Laura, too, though, is this, and that is we will still get calls from churches, from all across the board, individual churches in multiple denominations, that will still push back very, very hard against the implementation of the person of concern policy, because the conversation will go, this person walked in the door, they've been up front, they've told me all of that they have done, we're not going to prosecute again, therefore we just want to love this person, and in they come. I'm sorry, those days are gone. And that equates to nothing other than negligence. Because what we find, 80% of cases that we've been involved with over a long period of time, the offender who walks in the door and tells the senior pastor everything, the strategy is, if he thinks I'm telling him everything, he thinks I'm being upfront and I'm fully rehabilitated, I'm not going to do this on no risk, and I don't want to be judged again. And if there are too many that fall for that trick as such, what we have found, once we get in and we start to profile that offender, to look at whether they can even enter the person of concern process, on 80% of the time, offenders disclose 20% of what the reality is, of what they happened. I only ever did it once. Well, hang on, we need to see some court records here. We need to see this, we need to see that. And it's often then that people will think, oh, okay, I get it now. Okay, we do need to go a bit further. We need to look into this a bit deeper. We can't, sadly, just take people at face value, particularly when it comes to this.
Yeah.
I wonder if, so you've talked a little bit about how offenders operate in this space, particularly when they go out to market and do their reconnaissance. Just wondering, if you could comment to why perhaps so many victims choose not to report the abuse.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think probably a lot of people who are watching this have probably at some point maybe done some basic mandated notification training, and there's a whole range of programs out there, and that looks at a lot of reasons, common reasons such as embarrassment, shame, feeling partly responsible for the abuse that has occurred, and offenders actually want their victims to feel a degree of responsibility, or if not all, for it. The manipulation is, well, you've been bad, you've done this, so we better not tell anybody. So they use all of that manipulative behaviour and that strategy. But it goes beyond that. And one that we often don't think of is this. If you do tell anybody about this, this is what I will do to you.
Yeah.
This is what I will do to your family. And I won't give you examples of that, but just let me say that some of the examples I will give, I'm sure every single person watching would think, wow, I get it. I really understand why a child would not disclose now, if not ever. One denomination, I won't mention the name of it, probably wouldn't matter if I did, but I won't anyway, but one denomination 5 years ago did some research into the disclosure of abuse, from the point that abuse occurred to when it was disclosed, and the average within this denomination was 23 years. Yeah. So even after that, people keep it to themselves, they deal with it on their own. The Royal Commission's finding across the board came out at, I think, 24 years. So we know that we're around the mark. We know that there's some accuracy in that. But I think it's important that we understand the dynamic of the threat, the level of threat against the child as well, because if the child does disclose sexual abuse to somebody, we need to understand what that child is coming through to disclose that abuse.
Yeah.
Because in that child's mind, the reality is what's been stopping them is that if I do disclose this, I could be making my situation even worse because of the threats that have been held against me, or the threats that have been held against my sister or my brother. They'll be harmed. Therefore, I've got to protect them. And many young people have worn abuse and not spoken out about it because the deal or the promise has been, well, I'll keep doing this as long as you leave my brother or my sister alone, etc. So there's multiple layers as to why young people don't report.
Yeah.
And sadly, there's still too many out in our world today who hold the view that, well, you know what, if they didn't like it, they would have talked about it. More fool than that's their fault. They've got a tongue, they can talk. That's not how it works. This is about control, power, threats, intimidation. And that's why so many young people just keep it to themselves.
Yeah. And I mean, when you were talking this morning, Carl, about, you know, trying to encourage people, we're talking about people knowing their story, it's really quite remarkable when you're saying that you hear people that are trying to track through it, or they get through it, and it's like, it's really quite remarkable, isn't it? Like, from survivors who actually keep tracking through and trying to work it out.
Oh, it really is, because, you know, it's such a hard road, it's just not easy, and the memories are always there, and there's some scars there, but it's an incredible thing where people can get to that point where they say, you know what, didn't think I could ever say this, but life is good. Life is good, you know. And because so many people, even as adults, wear the shame of it and feel responsible for it, and they are not responsible for it. They were children, you know. We've had so many court cases where offenders, and they still do today, offenders will say, well, you know what, this child, they came on to me. They were flirting with me, and the reality is that we always need to remember that children are children and adults are adults, and adults primarily have they are responsible for it. It's a hard hurdle for a lot of people to get over, that they are not responsible, because in their mind they let it happen. But they've got to understand, they were a child, they were being used, they were manipulated, they were controlled.
Carl, I just wanted to let everyone know that we had talked about making sure that we had a Q&A section. So please, there are questions coming in, which is why we've added to some of the content and aim to respond to the questions. So we still got a bit of content that we would like to get through, but I do want to encourage you that if you do have a question of Carl as we go through, please pop it in the chat and we'll keep going. Something that has popped up, Carl, before we move on to rehabilitation, you mentioned about opening a file and gathering information about concerns that are raised. I'm just wondering if you could clarify about when you would involve police, particularly there is a concern. There's no necessarily evidence, but people are raising concerns to the leader or to the person there. When would you go to police?
I use the same principles as mandatory reporting, and that is, if you form the view that this has or is likely to have occurred, as a precaution, you should pass that on. And you have fulfilled what I believe a moral obligation to do that, because the bottom line is that if there is not enough associated with your concern, well, the police are not going to look into it. It's the same as a child protection report generally to the Department of Child Protection, but it's noted. And what happens if other people start ringing up, as well with similar concerns? But I think if in any area where we form a view that a criminal offence has or is likely to occur, we pass that on. If the police pick it up, they pick it up. If they don't pick it up, they say there's not enough here. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. We, as being responsible, we continue to monitor that situation. And it might get to the point whereby we need to sit down and have a discussion with somebody, because it may, that way we're not standing on or contaminating an investigation. We've actually got clearance from police to do that, because that was one of my big negatives in child protection investigations is that people would play investigator and then contaminate investigations for investigators.
Yeah.
But if you clear it with police and police would say, well, we're not going to respond to that, well, then you're not contaminating and you can move forward. And look, you know what? There's been cases where, and this is where again where the pendulum can't swing too far. There's been cases where we've actually sat down with someone and had to talk to them, and we've been as satisfied as we can be that there is no ill intent here, but this person needs to be aware of how people perceive their behaviour. They've got to understand they may have a lack of boundaries, and it's not a threatening boundary, but it's just an inappropriate boundary. So one way or another, we have to address it, and sometimes in addressing that, it brings it to the attention of the person, and you might not have another problem after that. Another time, it may be a person that's there for the wrong reasons, and often those people will get up and they'll do a runner, and sure, they might leave because they're offended by being approached, which is again the ugly reality of the situation, or they might get up and run because they know that people were onto them and they were suspected. So it's the ugly, complex framework that we're working in.
Yeah, there's another question in the chat that I just want to pick up before we move on. It says, what are some strategies to convince leaders in situations of historic abuses by a person of concern of the need to review their risk assessment and strategies of protection?
Okay, so I'm assuming by that there's a strategy in place. We've got a
sounds like. But you know, I think, and I've heard this a few times, like strategies to convince leaders. I think we might need to just look at the wording of that as well, in situation of historic abuse by a person of concern of the need to review their risk. So there's something in place, but it sounds like there might be a bit of a challenge, cultural challenge going on there.
Yeah. Look, my view with person of concern attendance agreements, and we need to understand this is not a legal document. This is an agreement between parties. Okay. My view is that they should be reviewed every 12 months. Now, having said that, I mean that's in the interest of all people. It may be that something needs to be added to that over a 12-month period. There may have been something that thought we need to add a component to that. It may be that we need to take a component out of it because it's no longer relevant. But I think it needs to be every 12 months. But you know what? Even so, a 12-monthly review may determine the fact that we don't need to have a review. but it sounds funny. A review determines that we don't need to have one. We might look at things just as is, no change here. Let's continue this way. So I just think it's really important as a matter of accountability to have that as well, because in the event of something going wrong, for the right reasons, we need to demonstrate that we haven't dropped the ball on this. And we are continuing to monitor and we review it. And I would just say in every review that would be just automatically built in. Now, other people, I know some that do it every 18 months. I know some that build it in every 2 years. Personally, I recommend 12 months.
Yeah, great.
All right. I've just put a poll out because I get a sense that this is a really important conversation. We got lots of engagement from the chat. And so just to get a sense if everyone's okay, if we may go a little over our 10:30, we'll try and keep it as close to our time because, Carl, I know you've, we've got you for a time period, but
yeah, right. That's fine by me. And I'm sorry if I.
No, it's such an important conversation, Carl, and you know, to be able to have you there for this time is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll just let everyone know that I put that poll out. At this stage, we're tracking at close to 90% of people saying they'd prefer to continue. And I also mentioned that this is largely conversational style. And so although we did advertise a Q&A section, I think that it has evolved that the Q&A is throughout our presentation. So we'll also continue with that. So I encourage you, if you do have a burning question, to please pop it in the chat.
Yep.
Organisational versus victim grooming and control. Again, something that we've talked about, and now we move on to rates of recidivism and rehabilitation. Can offenders be rehabilitated, Carl?
Yeah, well, I got a bit ahead of myself and touched on this earlier. Again, I think all things are possible. Like I said, I never want to lose that that reality. But I also talk about the fact that if you don't see what you're doing is wrong, that's a problem. I think that, like I said, once a person commits an offence against a child, there's a level of risk involved, no matter what type of offender they are. So we need to be responsible in that. And just give you an idea here is that there's a one particular case. It's the second now in Australia, whereby an offender is suing the church. The church placed him, didn't do a great profile, I must admit, or an assessment, but they placed him on an attendance agreement. The offender offended. Now, insurance policies for churches have a clause in them, and no underwriter will remove this clause, and that is that if you know of a sex offender within your church, it doesn't say convicted and it doesn't say child. It just says a sex offender within your church, and you allow that person to attend. If that person committed an offence, you have not 1 cent of liability cover. Now, we don't tell churches that for them to make their decision based on that, but they need to know the state of play. They need to know the landscape. This particular offender is now suing the church because, yes, he offended within the church. However, his claim is that the church, knowing of his background, failed to put appropriate controls around him, and because of that, placed him in a vulnerable situation where he offended. So he's actually holding the church accountable through the courts for negligence on that. So it's an interesting take on it, and this particular church, I must admit, took a view that this person committed these offences 15 years ago. Initially, they didn't really even want to put him on a plan because they just thought that he'd served his time, he'd come in, he'd repented. In his words, God had forgiven him, so he should have just been given open slather. And we had to work hard with that particular church to even put a plan into place. Yeah. So again, the preferential offender, yes, the risk is high to that of a situational offender because, as we've talked about, a situational offender, we actually have much more to work with. Look, years ago in Australia, we introduced Depo-Provera, the drug that reduced the ability for a male to obtain an erection, and everybody thought that was going to be the big saviour. However, it just didn't work because we even knew of offenders that were on release and were on Depo-Provera, but they were still grooming children for the time where they knew that they were coming off the Depo-Provera. So, the rates of recidivism in the preferential child molester are just, for me, they're just too high for us not to have a high level of vigilance and accountability.
So then, thinking about the person of concern process, there are obvious complexities when it comes to those who are convicted to those that are suspected. Is there anything that you can add to that or comment on in relation to that process and how we work through the different types of offenders, but also those that are suspected versus convicted? Yeah.
Firstly, I'm going to go back one step, and even with a preferential offender, I've known of some who, to the best of our knowledge, have undergone some really good psychosexual programs and counselling, had great support, and to the best of our knowledge, they haven't offended. So again, I'm never ever going to say never, but again, I come back to the level of risk and the rates of recidivism. When we look at convicted versus suspected, that's a whole new complexity. The person of concern policies that I've been involved in and that we'll share, particularly in the next session on the implementation and how they really function, how they work. A person who has not been convicted does not escape being identified as a person of concern. Doesn't automatically mean that they don't fit that category. So that depends on the individual policy and what a church or a denomination may implement themselves, and that's up to them. The policies I've written, as we certainly have scope in that to deal with people who are suspected, and that we would have significant concerns and maybe evidence about, but they've never been convicted. So it's we'll talk probably a bit more about that in the implementation in the next process, but it doesn't just mean that we can't implement a process there if we feel the need to do that. And another area to look at with the person of concern is that a person of concern process and agreement, again, first and foremost, this is about the safety of children, but even if a person has been wrongly accused, the fact of the matter is entering into a process can be designed in order to protect that person as well. So we need to remember that and keep that in the picture as well. Yeah.
I know we're just about to go on to the process, but there's a question here, Carl, and it's a really good one. Is it once an offender, always an offender? And where does forgiveness come into that?
Yep. Well, again, a situational offender, not necessarily. Well, hang on. Yes, once you've offended, you've offended. That's the reality of it. You've committed a sexual offence against a child. The situational, if we've got someone that's really sickened by what they've done and they realise that there's good pathways there for that person to work with at a positive aspect with professional help. The preferential, the pathways are open to them, but the level of risk is much, much greater. So if we look at once an offender, always an offender, when it comes to a person of concern policy, the answer would be yes, because you've committed that offence. And I think I may have said it earlier, once you commit a sexual offence against a child, you lose some entitlements in life forever. If I get out of prison tomorrow because I've embezzled my church for $500,000 over 10 years, you're not going to appoint me as the treasurer when I come back to a church, are you? You're not going to place me in that position. That would be irresponsible. So there are ongoing consequences. You don't put somebody back into a children's ministry or give them that role. Forgiveness, yes, there is forgiveness. We're not the judge, we're not the jurors. There is forgiveness, but in that forgiveness, there are still ongoing consequences within that. It's the same as if we have a pastor fall from sexual immorality. That in some ways that's going to rule that pastor or that minister out of that role for some time. In some cases, forever. In some cases, not all. So there's going to be consequences there on that. In those circumstances, this is the same. This is a person who has committed an offence. They present as a risk. Yes, God can forgive them. They can move on. They can move on in life. They can move on with their faith and their journey. But there are going to be some restrictions around them in certain parts of their life. There's no denying that. No denying.
Great.
So, Carl, what about I know we're going to go into it in greater detail next session, but the person of concern process, can you give us a brief overview of the process and the policy and the frameworks that have helped develop it in that we can speak to lead into what we're tackling in more detail next session?
Yeah, well, the key points for the policy that I've been involved in, and we've now had implemented in a couple of denominations for pretty well on a decade, looks at first and foremost the identification phase, and the process from that is that what we will unpack will be the next step of the Director of Professional Standards or the relevant person within the denomination to meet with the pastor of the church or key leaders to talk about what they know and how they know it. Again, if we think that there is ongoing offences being committed, any hint of criminal activity would be reported to the police to make sure, again, that happens and that we're not contaminating any possible investigation by police. But if that's not the case, and this is someone that's got previous history, we look at meeting with that person to, one, fully explain every component of the person of concern policy, to give them the option as to whether they want to enter this process or not. It's a decision that they can make. The reality is, with my background as a profiler, even at that level, I'm beginning to profile that person by looking at their responses to questions and willingness and playing down any offences that they've had or minimising it. or gaining a sense that they are still not owning this. They still might be blaming a child or other people. They're not owning it themselves. So that the profiling is happening right throughout this process. And if the person does agree to go forward in that process, we seek things such as records of interview, summary sentencing from magistrates, judges, psych assessments, pre-release reports, assessments, etc. Whatever we can get, and that person willingly hands that over. In some cases, we get entire court transcripts, which is really helpful. A lot of work, but really, really helpful. And through that entire process and assessing all the information we've got at hand, as well as the profiling aspect that I conduct, we will then come back to the church leadership and basically say, it's our view, it's our recommendation for your leadership, this or this. And it will either be, we don't think that you should allow this person to actually attend under any circumstances. And to put that into context, I know that's really difficult for a lot of us to accept, because the church is the church and we're open to all people. But again, I'll come back to Bob, who I spoke about earlier. Bob was 65 years of age, committed his first offence at 22. And Bob would have no problem sitting beside me in this webinar now, looking down the barrel of the camera and saying, I cannot promise you I won't do it again. In fact, I can guarantee I will. He is a chronic serial offender. You cannot take the risk with an offender of that nature. Or it may be that we've got an offender where there's ample opportunity for us to work through a process, develop a management plan, and that management plan can look very differently. It can be huge on the scale of what that looks like. Every case is going to be different. We work through that with the offender or the person of concern, and if the person of concern through that process agrees to sign off on that, we can move forward. It's not a legal document. We have offenders that come back and say, well, I've been advised by my solicitor not to sign it. That's okay. It's not a legal document. This is an agreement between us. If you're not prepared to sign it, the process ends. That's it. Right. Yeah. That is it, because that's a lack of cooperation and a lack of commitment. And signing off on an agreement too ensures it is about the conditions, but it also ensures that we are all on the same page and we understand. We can't have someone coming back saying, well, I breached that condition. Well, I didn't really understand it. I thought I could do that. You just can't leave room for that. So in fairness to the person of concern, they've got to totally understand and agree to the process as well. They have input. They have input into that. We can discuss it. We can negotiate it. However, the reality is, with a person of concern policy, there may be some things in there that would be negotiable, but there will be some things that will just not be negotiable because of seriousness of the matter. Then we advise our insurance company. We don't give insurance companies identifying information, but we advise them of the process, and this is what we've got in this particular church, and then through to the ongoing review every 12 months. But what we can look at in the next session is we can certainly unpack that in a lot more detail. Yeah.
There is a question that relates directly to this, which I wonder if you can have a brief comment, knowing that we're going to go into greater detail next session. These agreements involve chaperoning. What training should be provided to chaperones?
Yeah, look, very good point, and it goes even further than that, because a part of this process that I did overlook there is we actually assess the church's ability to manage this. And provide training to them. So, and in reality, some churches come back and say, we don't want to go through the process. In fact, we're just not going to allow the person to attend, because it's not because they don't care for this person. It's because they don't believe they've got the capacity to do it, to manage it. And that's a responsible decision. Yeah. And then they may work with that person to find a church for them and develop a process there. There's some very large churches within Australia now who have made a blanket policy that they will not allow any person of concern to attend under any circumstance, any convicted person, because their fear is that they are just too big and they cannot guarantee the safety of people or adequately supervise somebody. So that's all a part of the process and a part of the train. We would put a team together within the church to manage this person. There'd be one person usually that would lead that team and be the key go-to people, and we would provide ample training and ongoing non-stop support and backup to those teams in the ongoing management of those people. And when you talk about chaperoning, we can, depending on the type of agreement, we can have a minder whereby it's what we call observational minder. There could be 2 or 3 people that are observational minders, and they do just monitor when this person is on site, because this person is allowed to come to this particular service or this particular activity. Or it can go right through to the extreme where you have a minder by your side every second of the time you're on this property as such. So again, every case is going to be different and needs to be looked at in its own context. Yeah.
Just on that, Carl, you're talking about the big ones there, and I know Daniel and I both have had this experience where we've actually got, some quite small churches, and I know, we have an independent church that's set up and they have no paid staff. What is your advice for them trying to get their head around this space and how to equip themselves should they want to manage it, but they've got no paid staff, they're trying to equip their community? What's your advice for them?
I think it comes back to whatever denomination they're a part of. It needs to come from the denomination. It needs to come. There needs to be something from there across churches. If that's not in place, they need to, in a sense, engage. This is not an advert for me, folks. I've got enough in my life going on. Somebody like me, or somebody who does something like me in their state, to come in and help them and give them the advice and guidance and support them through the process. The other important factor there also is that that's not such a bad thing, because you're also demonstrating that you're not just doing this in-house. And that's really, and the Royal Commission's been really big on in-house responses, in-house investigations. So an external body can be very good as a matter of accountability and integrity as well. Get somebody that knows
what they're doing.
Absolutely, it's horses for courses,
for sure.
Getting people who know what to do. Absolutely.
Carl, there's been a question in relation to, if you could comment, what about when there's a person who has sexually abused a child, but they were under 18 at the time of the abuse? Is there any additional complexities or things that you can mention in a case like that? Particularly if afterwards, even though it's been found out, but there's been no criminal charges because they were under 18.
Okay, so just so I get this right. So the person who committed the offence was under 18. Yeah, okay. Well, again, with the person concerned process, it's about responding to what you know. So if you've got a person that owns that and says, yes, that's what I've done, that situation then is looked at in its context, okay? Because you now know that this person has. So that's what I was saying about a non-conviction doesn't rule somebody out as being a person of concern. We've got someone here that we've found out about and has acknowledged that this has happened. So let's sit down with that person. Let's go through the process. Let's look at why that's happened and work through it from that perspective. You've got to look at a person under 18 offending. Was it within a realm of, depending on what age they were, was it in that exploratory stage of life? What were the circumstances around it? Age. If you were quite young when you did it, where did you learn that behaviour? How did you come to know about that behaviour? Or if you're older, that's why it's important we can't just have a blanket response, a blanket cover. We need to look at every situation. But the bottom line is, if we know about it, we need to respond to it in some way. Yeah.
I've got a question here. It's coming privately, but it's a good one. So I'm going to pitch it to you, Carl. How do you convince a congregation to implement a management plan for a person of concern when they refuse? How do you or should you enforce policy in this situation? And should there be consequences for the congregation's non-compliance? Sorry, there's about 3 questions in there.
That's right. Yeah, well, again, for me, it's got to come driven from the denomination, okay? Now, and that looks different across our denominations, doesn't it? The structures are very, very different. I'll give you an example within Baptist churches where I oversee this, and it's similar to another denomination that I've helped write a policy for as well. People might not agree with this, whatever, and some structures in some denominations wouldn't allow for this in some ways. But I'll give you an example. What's done, or when I say we, I'm independent, but what is done in BCSA, all senior pastors sign off on a code, and that code also states that they clearly understand that this is a process that we have in place, and that they understand the process and are committed to the process to work through it at a cohesive, cooperative level. If we had a church that we thought were being highly irresponsible, there's two things that could occur. One is that the pastor could be held accountable for that, and also the church could, in some cases, have their insurance pulled, and they would have to go and find their own insurance, which would obviously come at a far greater cost. I'm pleased to say we've never had an issue, and that might sound like too hard to believe, but the fact is we've never had an issue in that denomination because we have massive buy-in with it. Some other denominations do experience far greater pushback. One of the reasons that we don't get pushback so much in this space is that we've been proactive and it's been embedded into our training for the last decade. So when something like this happens, it's not new, or what do we do in this space? We know what the state of play is. We know what we have in place, and people have confidence in it because they've actually seen it work. It doesn't mean we haven't had some healthy, robust decisions on what the outcomes should be. That's fine. But we've always been able to get to a place, and that's important. So it's got to be from the denomination to support those churches in saying this is what we've got in place, and it's up to the denomination really to look at, are there consequences for churches that might be naive, or what it is.
What about when we're speaking to an independent church, Carl? So there is no over structure denomination; it's an independent. Is there any advice that you give to those members who are seeing blockages or refusal to respond from leadership?
Well, the problem is if they're independent, they're not accountable to anybody, are they? So there's no, in some cases there's no opportunity for input. If they hold the view that it's not necessary, the bottom line is they're dangerous. It's as simple as that. They're downright dangerous. We will get calls from churches today, right across denominations, and the call will go like this. We know we've got to do this training. We know there's been a Royal Commission. Your organisation delivers training in this area. What is the least? What can we do? What's the least amount we can do here to tick a box? And I'll be honest with you, when I hear that, I'll bow out. I won't even provide, because they're not serious about. They just want to tick a box, and that's dangerous. And the conversation will often go, and I don't agree with this because these offenders, they've served their time, they've done this, they've been forgiven by God, therefore we're just going to allow them to come in. You know what? Churches that allow that to happen, or individuals that allow that to happen, I hope I don't offend anybody here. I think most people would agree with me. I hold people who have those views and opinions in relation to this space as equally as dangerous as the offenders themselves. Because they create the environments for offenders, because offenders look for the soft target. We've already talked about they do their homework, and they target vulnerable children, they target vulnerable people, vulnerable organisations as well. And again, I'm not just pulling that out of the air because, like I said earlier, we spend too much time in churches helping them pick up the pieces because they haven't responded well to this.
And I really hope we can move, and especially since the Royal Commission, we can move past language of trying to convince. Like, I'd really hope the language changes from trying to convince to how do we raise awareness and support, and if people are still trying to convince, I'd encourage them to get in touch with you or people that can help come on board on that journey.
And look, can I stress, because we've focused very obviously heavily on offenders in this. I never want people to think that my view is, I've already talked about the pendulum not swinging too far. This is about well balanced. We've focused on offenders and we've talked about the dark side of offenders and the reality of that. But I don't want everybody to think that in every situation that might come our way, we just automatically jump to this extreme radical view.
Yeah.
Not that. It's a well-balanced view. Children first and foremost, and all people
Yeah.
are important.
So on that, actually, this balanced view, there's a question to balance out our conversation that says, if your church or leadership does not have the time or expertise to support an offender, it would be better to assist the offender to find a more suitable community, such as Friends of Dismiss, than just let them attend or not lead or follow the process properly. Like, have you got a comment to that? Like, even speaking about Friends of Dismiss or places that you know that places of worship for offenders to go.
Yeah. Well, I think the church has a responsibility to still journey with this person. It just looks different. So let's look at what is available for this person of concern. If this can't happen, what's the next best thing? Some churches, I've known some great. I keep coming back to it. It's the same example, but I'll talk about Bob because Bob, when his offences became known, obviously that was it in terms of that church. But what that church did with him, they put a group of 4 or 5 people together, and it was basically a pastoral care team for Bob. Now let me tell you, the leaders identified people within their church to say, we think these people could be suited for this ministry. Now some people said, yep, I'd be interested in that ministry, even though Bob's done these horrendous things. Some other people they approached said, don't let me anywhere near him because there'll be consequences. That's a good call. That's not their ministry. So they named that. But they eventually had a group of 5 people. What these 5 people did, they regularly met with Bob. They held Bible studies with him. They took him on outings. They had communion with him. They visited him regularly. They all maintained contact with him. Let me tell you, it wasn't wishy-washy stuff. They held him highly accountable for what he did. They ensured that he continued on to get the professional support that he needed as well. And that went on for years. So that's one way the church was innovative and still had a ministry arm to him and maintained that. So it doesn't mean that we throw people on the scrap heap. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with human beings. Some people would argue that, but the fact is we are. They've committed horrendous offences, but they are still in society and they need to be managed in society. And you know what? They need to be cared for in society.
We're approaching Q2, and so we've gone 15 minutes over. I've got one more question, and maybe Laura, if you do too, and we'll look to wrap this up, given the time commitments ourselves and also those that have linked in. Just wondering, if we think about people of concern trying to convince us that they're no longer a risk, and do you have any advice or are you able to briefly list any key behaviour changes or warning signs that we might look out for as people go through that process, perhaps slipping or even trying to pull the wool over our eyes?
Well, I think that's where the monitoring is just really important because here's the difficulty in this space. You can have someone who has truly repented, truly understands what they've done is wrong, and they are absolutely committed to never making this mistake again. The problem is the ones who are not in that space make it hard for those. They just make it really difficult across the board. So I think it's a matter of just. I mean, we've had offenders that have tried to exploit some of the orders and create confusion around them, and that's why it's important to have them really as airtight as we can possibly have them. But I think it's a matter of just Daniel, the ongoing monitoring and just looking for danger flags and confronting them when they're identified rather than letting them go. So that's the only it's really the only comment I can make in that space is just the vigilance, the monitoring, and not backing off, not taking your foot off the pedal. And even if you think, look, things are going really, really well, and there's no real need for this to be ongoing or as stringent as what it is, you just don't cut corners, don't take easy way outs. Keep it in place, keep the vigilance up, because that's where you identify it. Not everybody in your congregation is going to know about that. Well, hang on, we'll talk about that in the next session, because that's one of the big questions. Who do we tell within our congregation?
Yeah, that's right.
Who do we tell? Who we don't tell? Who needs to know? What about confidentiality? All these things start to come into play that really impact what you're talking about, or you're asking here. Yeah.
Right.
I've got another one on the private, so I'll raise this one. Is it possible to have some more discussion or work on responding to best practices in responding well when people raise a concern about a person, and at the same time, best care for people against a possible false accusation? This seems to be one of the concerns of many people in our church.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that, and that's what we're talking about. Mud sticks if it gets out, doesn't it? You know, if it gets out that, you know, someone's suspecting this and there's nothing in it, that's the complexity. So I think that's where the level of confidentiality comes into it. And you speak to your pastor, you speak to a key leader, and that's where training around a person of concern process with your key leaders in a church is important, because when something happens like this for the first time, you're not backtracking and having to educate people about the process. The process involved, they've got an understanding of the process, so they're starting from an understanding. And then if a director of professional standards or someone comes in to get alongside of them, then they can say, okay, what are our options in this space? What's the best way to respond to this? There's no proof here. We need to be very careful about not getting out, because we don't want somebody falsely accused and that getting out there. So how do we manage this from this perspective? So you might put an interim phase into operation. The thing is, again, with my background as well, I mean, we if we have very strong information, I won't share how, but there's strategies that you can put in place that will help you to determine whether or not there may or may not be some substance to this.
Yeah.
They're not things that we would make known.
And is there a plan if you have a suspicion though? Like, what's the plan if there's a suspicion? Like, I think you referred to that earlier, like you might have a few people that are, you know, monitoring the situation, I guess. Is that your best approach?
Yep. You have people just to monitor from a healthy distance to see if they identify. So whatever the concern is that's been reported, you monitor to see whether or not people can identify through other sets of eyes and ears those same concerns.
Sure.
So you try to see if you can get any consistency out what's been reported.
Yeah.
And there are ways there's ways to just make very discreet inquiries. Social media is amazing. You've got no idea what you do have an understanding what you can find out on social media, what you can find out.
That's right.
Facebook pages and who they associate with and who they don't. Some language that they use, etc. There are a range of options if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm sure.
without accusing somebody, but just
Yeah,
great. Thanks, Carl. So we might start to conclude today. I'm just going to provide a link as we start to wrap up to the evaluation for today. But I'll go back to the slides as well. Laura.
Okay, yes. So for those of you that were with us for our grooming webinar series, we provided an information sheet and we've pulled together all the legislation for you on grooming, so we can provide that for you. But it's just to remind you, if you weren't part of that series, I'm sure you are all aware that grooming is a criminal offence. And for more information about your grooming legislation in your state and territory, you can go to your regulatory body website in each state and territory, but we have provided that for you, so you can just have a look at the sheet.
Thanks, Laura. And just, if you do suspect grooming, there's the police link number there, 131 444, or if you you believe a criminal offence is occurring, or somebody's at immediate risk, call 000, and please inform your safeguarding leader about your concerns. And I just realised, my apologies, that I haven't changed the slide. There we go.
It's okay. Yep. And again, as you know, the videos and the content that we've been through today is, you know, for those who it's new to you or you're coming into this space. Again, we've got some support numbers there for Bravehearts, Blue Knot, Lifeline and Kids Helpline. But we do encourage you to go to your pastoral care people within your denominations, or reach out to us if you don't know who that is. And Carl, I'm sure, is very happy to answer questions. So please just take care of yourself. It's not easy content, but we're all trying to manage it the best way we can.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, Carl. In wrapping up, before we do our final thank yous and goodbye, just to make everyone aware that we will be sending out to all of you a copy of the slides, the resource sheet, and a link to the evaluation for today's session. I did post that it is available if you click on it or open up a new tab in your browser. It is really important to both the National Council of Churches in Australia and CPSL to hear your feedback, to inform our training and the sessions that we provide. And it's great learning for us, but also in our continuous improvement. So please make sure that you do complete it. And Carl, thank you very much. We look forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, touch base again on the 5th, and I think we just put a plug in there that if you haven't already, I encourage you to register for the 5th. It will go into more detail about the process and the person of concern process. So thanks, Carl. Laura, appreciative. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Carl. A fantastic discussion. Can't wait for the next one.
Thanks, guys.
All of you out there, thanks for hanging in there for a little bit longer. I hope it was of value. And for those who are joining in a couple of weeks, we'll see you on the 5th. Have a great weekend. See you, everybody.
Bye. Bye.